A lot of my exploration and journey has been as a squatter, living close to the land, building cabins with friends, and learning how to live really, really intimately with the land by hunting and foraging and gardening and scrounging, and like you said, living at the edge of civilization, not, kind of dancing between the two worlds of human society and wild nature.
Hi, welcome to Peak Moment. I'm Janaea Donaldson. I'm on Vancouver Island with someone who has learned to live at the edges of civilization. I'm with Miles Olson. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Miles is the author of Unlearn, Rewild. The side tag says Earth Skills, Ideas, and Inspiration for the Future Primitive, which is a really intriguing sort of subtitle here. Your book is partly philosophical and partly very, very practical. And the philosophical side gets into what's wrong with civilization and why you turned at least part of a shoulder away from that to try and live more close to the land. Tell us how you got to that way of thinking. What's Unlearn about?
Unlearn is about, I got to that way of thinking, I guess, being just a typical disenchanted youth growing up in mainstream society and being kind of pissed off with the world and whatever options I was presented with for a future and for a profession, and a feeling of just sadness and soullessness that I think most people kind of at a deep level, or maybe right at the surface, feel. And yeah, as a teenager, I decided to go spend a summer living alone in the woods, and I thought I'd read Thoreau, and I had probably read a little bit of the Buddha's teachings, and all the kind of truth seekers and the truth seers that had gone into nature to experience a truer reality. And so, long story short, when I was 17, I went to do something like that, mostly just because the world was really confusing and I wanted to try and make sense of it. And I spent a summer alone in the woods, and what I realized very shortly after arriving is that I thought I was walking away from civilization. I thought I was walking away from all of what was messed up and dysfunctional about the world that I'd grown up in. But I actually brought it with me because it was largely my own stuff. It was largely contagion that I was filled with.
Well, think about it. We've all been programmed really well on how you live within the civilization. Yeah. It's like wherever you go, there you are. Yeah. And that conditioning. Yeah.
So, I mean, I was just 17, but I went through hell that summer, just facing myself alone in nature, right, without the distractions and trinkets that I'd grown up with. And at the end of that summer, I was in a state of, my mind had really slowed down, and I didn't do any practices to achieve that or anything. It was just a natural state of detox or whatever, mental and emotional detox. And I guess for the next 10 years since then, I've been trying to put that, or more than 10 years, I've been trying to put that experience into context, and all sorts of missteps and strange illusions and trials and experiments and successes and errors later, I decided to write a book that speaks a little bit about where I am or where I was when I was writing that. And unlearning, I guess it seems like that's the fundamental process to begin to live in a way that is not dysfunctional, and to try and purge ourselves of that dysfunctional kind of programming that this culture and this reality breeds into us.
And you do a really good, clear, and concise way of looking at that toxic programming of a culture that's in civilization, that's insane, It's destroying everything. The hierarchy, the racism,
Mm-hmm.
the sexism. You know, you cover very, you know, in really just short and sweet, like the title, ways that how that dysfunctional system keeps us, you know, keeps us under control.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, part of the book, I contradict myself a lot in the book, which I think is kind of good and interesting. It's, I don't know, that's part of exploring, right?
It's right, it is. And you'll say,
poking at this
this
and
is
poking at that.
controversial. And it's like, yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, so my experience in that, you know, a lot of my exploration and journey has been as a squatter, living close to the land, building cabins with friends, and learning how to live really, really intimately with the land by hunting and foraging and gardening and scrounging, and like you said, living at the edge of civilization, not, you know, kind of dancing between the two worlds of human society and wild nature. And I guess there's a lot of things that are at least we perceive as put in place to prevent us from doing that. Laws, boundaries, all sorts of different things.
Oh, for sure.
And I guess my experience has been that the main things stopping me and people that I see, I mean, those are real things, but my experience has been that I just was able for many, many years to just walk through those things, because most of them are invisible agreements that we just make, right? And they're enforced, and if you're too belligerent and you're so on and so forth, then they'll be enforced on you. But my experience was just that I was passionate about living a certain way with integrity, in a way that was, you know, really positive, and just exploring something that was healing, and exploring truth, and all those agreements and institutional illusions and stuff didn't bother so much.
It strikes me that perhaps you were living in a way that was just as sort of, that came to be as natural as the deer in the woods, you know, as the tides, because you were wanting to live more close to your own wild nature.
Yeah,
maybe?
I wouldn't say it was as
Maybe?
close as those things.
No,
but,
no. On the way towards that, I guess is
Yeah,
what I would say.
yeah.
Because you're unwinding, you're unpacking a lot of that programming.
Yeah. The further you go on that journey, though, the bigger the steps become, and the more dysfunction you surfaces up the further you go, or the harder the climb, the steeper the crevasse. Or, So yeah, I guess relative to someone living in a high-rise or something, living in a really simple way without electricity or running water, just with other people really intimately and codependently, and with most of food coming from the land, or scavenging or scrounging or whatever. I mean, that's a big difference.
Yes, it is.
Those two juxtapositions. But that, and then kind of the reality of pure wild nature, those are still two pretty disparate things, because there's still these crazy humans that are have their crazy human consciousness.
With things like property. I mean, one of the things that struck me as I was reading your book was that where might one live? Well, some people can afford to buy, to own that land, but not everyone. That's not always an option. And so, and you talk about staying, you know, in the national parks. Well, there are laws, as you pointed out, and you were on private property.
Yeah.
As a squatter.
Yeah.
Can you give us a sort of a flavor? You already did a little bit, a flavor for what kind of skills did you? And that's part of the second part of your book. What kind of skills did you have to find, adapt, use that might go all the way from dumpster diving? I don't know. You didn't mention that here.
Yeah, I mean, the skills set I didn't grow up with of living close to the land, because I just didn't. I mean, no, I didn't. I mean, I learned how to split firewood that first summer when I was living in the woods by myself, and I learned how to light fires during that time, it was incredibly slow and clumsy learning all the skills. And people now I teach how to make fires by friction and stuff, and I know how to make fires pretty decently. But there was a winter when a friend and I didn't know that when you cut a tree down and it's fresh, it's filled with sap, right?
Yep.
Anyone who's lived in the country at all knows this. This
Yes.
is like turning a tap on for water. So you need to dry the tree out and cure it so that it will burn without all of that water and it just basically sizzling and simmering
And not burning.
yeah,
Really,
well,
really.
the water
Not
needs
not
to
giving
evaporate
heat.
before
Sure.
the wood can burn, right? So the first winter, the friend and I were living in this tiny little cabin we had built. We cut down this tree and we had all this firewood and we had a little wood stove and we tried to burn it. And for like weeks, we were no fire, starting to suffer from carbon monoxide poisoning, probably, just like getting pneumonia or whatever. And eventually someone told us, oh, if you find a dead tree, it's dry and you can use that. So just little things like that along the way, just so much clumsiness.
Well, in part, what I heard is that you didn't have someone to teach you. You didn't have an ancestor. You didn't have an elder who already knew those things that they could pass it on. Such people must exist, but they may be, closeted out there and hard to find.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, a lot of the skill, the people that I was learning the stuff with, we learned how to hunt and how to process animals and dry all the meat and use all the body parts. And yeah, we didn't really have people to reach out for in our sphere to learn that stuff.
You also talk about, you call these endangered skills. I like that. You also talked about making traps and snares, and as well as how you process all the food, which sounds to me like we're hard won through experience.
Yeah, and there might have been there's more efficient ways to learn, but yeah, we just decided to learn experientially, and that's always been most attractive to me. I guess really I was drawn to doing all the stuff for kind of, because I was seeking something. It wasn't for physical reasons so much as some kind of invisible thing that I was seeking, something that had more integrity or that was true, that felt alive, that actually felt alive. So I guess I was taking a philosophy and trying to live it, and so making it an experiential philosophy, which is the only philosophy that's worth anything as far as I'm concerned.
Sure. Yeah. Otherwise, it's merely what the mind.
You might as well watch a football game, right? It's a spectator sport,
But it occurred to me that your journey, that quest for something deeper, which partly you express here as reconnection to the living wild. You start your book out saying something, you can quote it better than I can, about the only war that matters is the war against wildness. All other wars are subsumed by it. And your critique includes not only civilization, trying to stamp out the wild, and domestication of animals and plants, are a couple of the main thoughts that I watch you take a look at. And your learning to be not just a hunter-gatherer, but a trapper, gardener, is the way you look at it, helping the plants that are there, propagate a harvest. Your reconnection to the earth and your wildness sounds like part of that quest.
Oh yeah, that's the primary part of that quest, really. Yeah, I think that the war that, we often think of nature and wildness as external things, right?
That's right.
And we think of, even if you're aware that there is a problem with sustainability, or I talk about domestication in the book, and how wild nature just exists. There's this life force that everything is filled with, right? And everything in the natural world, the wild natural world that humans don't tamper with, it just has this life force that infuses it, that drives it to grow and exist in this synergistic way, and everything is kind of, it's this intelligence that it's all filled with. And it kind of balances off of each other, and life turns into death, and death turns into life, and it's this amazing amazing, brilliant process that we are not actually, that we're only separated from because of our programming, right? The only thing that separates us from it, because what's going on, I'm breathing, like we're having this conversation, but at the same time I'm breathing, and that oxygen is oxygenating my blood. I don't really understand the science of it, but there's this cellular kind of this symphony going on in my body, right? And all these neurons firing in my brain, and digestion going on. There's all this, like, that kind of nature force is enacted in us right now, right?
And your guts have all these bacteria living in. Right.
Even if we were just smoking joints and laying in a ditch, the nature force would still be the fundamental thing that was operating. But we have this cloud in our consciousness, sort of, right? Which I talked about when I went alone into the woods, just feeling like, oh wow, just being confronted with my own conditioning, my own programming. That's what separates us from fully being part of that kind of amazing aliveness of wild nature. And I think most people are interested in feeling that. You know?
I think so. And we could probably look at, the people that backpack and hike or even garden are all, there's that primordial reconnection desire, impulse there in us to know that we're part of that wild aliveness.
Yeah, because almost universally people will see a photo of some mountain vista or something and say, wow, that's beautiful. And there's this kind of a longing to like feel that, to internalize what that is, that energy. And to me, I think that, that's what drives people who are interested in gardening, people who are interested in sustainability, people who are interested in anything that connects us more to our land base or to the living world. It's actually, that is a reflection of part of ourselves. And so for me, living in community, all these different things, all sorts of, during my journey, there's been all sorts of different influences that have kind of like, there's been a central thrust, which is that awakening, that aliveness kind of growing in myself. And then it's reflected in the external world when we make that shift in ourselves. We don't live in a vacuum or whatever. There's a feedback mechanism that exists. But my journey has been, that's the central thrust, and then there's been different kind of vagaries along the way. But I think that's really, isn't that what everyone's journey is,
Not necessarily. I mean, certainly there's a whole body of people that aren't in touch with that.
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
And there's different ways to articulate it.
Right. I mean, I understand that even though our journey has been different on the relative to the land, getting to live in one place for 20 odd years and trying to do as minimal impact, trying to let ourselves become part of that natural community to the degree we could. No, we didn't have any pets. Yes, we walked in the woods. Even when our footprint became smaller and just living in our trailer, I found that we were even more connected with who the animals were that were coming through and at what time, and that this raven had a different song that taught language than that one. I mean, those things that only come with more, more access to the wild.
Right.
It's on its own terms.
Right.
You're not going to get that in a city apartment.
No. But the interesting thing is we have preconceptions about what wild is, right? Which is something that I've given a lot of thought to, especially since the book came out, and talking about it a lot, and then kind of sensing people's preconceptions of what wildness is. And I guess when I talk about it being something that's kind of innate in us, there's nothing that isn't that. There's all like, when I say, isn't that everyone's journey? I guess when someone thinks of, oh no, you're talking about wildness, so you're talking about something very specific, and I have an idea. When I picture wildness, I picture a mountain with a lake, and I picture forest, and I picture this and that and that. But that's not what wildness is. Wildness is spontaneous. It is uncontrolled. It is it's this self-regulating thing that it's an energetic state more than it is the thing. It's a state of being more than an image or whatever.
It's also about relationships. I mean, you were
Yeah.
just talking about, I mean, as you say, when we're born, we're wild animals. So, I mean, that we got funneled into civilization is just one option. One way of, is that we could just as easily be, you know, living as you have done on the land. That being here is wild. And thus, that's our home place. Maybe in a sense, all those spiritual teachers that are talking about finding that place inside are all pointing to the same thing that you're talking about.
Yeah, I think so. Just that life force, and there's all sorts of different labels for it. Doesn't matter what the label is. It's just the central driving force that's making all these plants live, and it's making the seasons turn. It's just it's that force, and we all have it in ourselves. And once one, it's like how you can't predict how nature is going to express itself. And that's what we try to do through our domestication, right? Like, we take a forest and we turn it into a field, and then we plow the field and we spray the field and we put it into submission, and we make it say food, whatever we think food is.
Right.
With a human, if, you know, with the field, if you stop doing that, if you stop domesticating it, then you never know what's going to happen. It could turn into thistles. It could turn into a bunch of blackberry vines. It could turn immediately into a pond, or you know, what you know. There's just it's completely up to the mystery of creation or whatever. You know?
Yeah.
And it's the same with us. You know, if you let go of whatever it is, there's external things that control us, right? And then there's internal things to control us. And it's really easy to identify those external things, and it's somewhat easy to navigate around them into, like, they're just superficial things.
Yes. Okay.
But the ones that we carry inside are much more insidious. And I guess how a human's going to express themselves in their true nature, I have no idea. It might look like someone living on a little piece of land and being a gardener, or it might look like something else. It might look like anything. I don't know. But the whole idea behind rewilding is kind of honoring that process in the land, in people, in yourself.
Yes.
And starting to kind of treat life as sacred, treat that expression of the life force as something that's sacred.
Which the indigenous peoples, whose cultures were sustainable forever, all taught us, are teaching us. It's all sacred, and we don't need to control it all. But undoing those things inside and out, those, you know, those beliefs that I need the comfort of the system. I need to live within the system. You know, those are harder to unwind because we've been swimming in them. Well, not just in our own individual lives, but our ancestors, you know, for hundreds of years or thousands of years. It says domestication is the only, we will starve, you know, if we don't domesticate and control other people, other animals, the planet.
Yeah.
It's hard to unwind.
I know, and we think of it even in our own personal lives. It's like, oh, I'll starve if I take that chance, or if I, you know what I mean? Like, there's all these different levels.
I do understand that.
To tie it into, because I know that your show is about sustainability and stuff, to relate it to that, because I talk a lot about sustainability in the book. I guess one really interesting revelation that I had was, and I write about it in the book, is if there was the revolution tomorrow, or if civilization collapsed tomorrow, and all of those external structures that domesticate, whether it's the government or whatever external structure it is that kind of enforces our trap or whatever, if that exists, if that vanished tomorrow, then it's almost certain that people would start rebuilding it the next day, or maybe a couple hours after it.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
And a lot of otherwise brilliant thinkers overlook this. It's huge, and people just negate it. And you know, they're urging, oh, we need to bring the revolution and this collapse and all this stuff. It needs to happen. And for a long time, that was my philosophy too. It was like, yeah, we need this shift. We need this jolt. And that's when people are going to start getting it. And I get the sense that there's something very deep that shift would not address. That's just a superficial shift.
Yes,
it's
yes,
just
yes.
It's just like taking my shirt off and thinking I'll feel better because I look different or something.
Right, right. Richard Heinberg, in one of his earlier books, before he got into peak oil and peak resources, one of his earlier books talked about humans acting as if we've all got post-traumatic stress syndrome, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like some huge trauma happened to the whole race, thousands of years ago, whatever. You can't put your finger on it. And we are all sort of desperate and scared and afraid and so on. And that when I read that section of your book, I thought, right, we are still not, there's still so much trauma here that we're so afraid of death.
That's the fundamental issue, And to negate that is negligent. It's like, unless we've unlearned that conditioning, unless that program is gone, then that program is going to play out.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
Because that's what creates our reality, the program. If I know what plants are edible, then all of a sudden this beach takes a very different look than someone who hates beaches because they just hate the water.
Or is scared of the wild and feel powerless. I mean, I think that part of that trauma is based on we don't want to feel helpless, powerless, whatever. And for most of us to go out into the woods and attempt to live as you did, we would probably, either we'd back out or do as you had done, which is learn by the hard way, learn the skills we need to do that. And I realize that's only the externals, but that's still part of disengaging the program and the fear. Can I survive out here?
Yeah.
Yeah, that question.
And, I think that unprogramming and that unconditioning really has to happen in the context of our lives. It has to happen within the fabric of our lives, right? Mm-hmm. So for me, connecting to the land and having relationships that are healthy and that honor other people or that honor just life, to me, that's part of that process. It's like a necessary part of that process.